You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Libertarian Country is one of the fastest growing and most popular liberty-themed apparel companies in the world. This American-based company was founded by two brothers out of Baltimore who had a vision to create an online store that offers fun, unique, and controversial political clothing and accessories. This five-star company offers the hottest shirts, hoodies, hats, and so much more. So check them out today. This is an independently owned, liberty-loving business that basically gives you the exact type of apparel and paraphernalia that you've wanted anyway. You just didn't know you wanted it now. Every purchase you make using the link in the show notes allows a small part of your purchase to come back and support the show. So go grab some awesome Libertarian Country swag using that link in the show notes. You'll thank me later. Real fast, let me go ahead and tell you about InboxDollars. Are you looking for a side hustle so easy you could do it while sitting on the toilet or in between commercials watching your favorite show? Unless you're like on demand and commercials are like an ancient thing to you, hear me out. InboxDollars has your back. For 20 years, InboxDollars has paid over $59 million in cash rewards to its members for doing everyday online activities such as reading emails, taking online surveys, playing games, and watching videos and TV. They also have ongoing promos and contests for members to win money online. And they share the top ways for people to get beauty samples, free printable coupons, and other free online stuff. With so many easy ways to earn extra cash online and having fun in the process, it's no wonder Forbes, Mashable, Bustle, and so many other trusted outlets name InboxDollars the easiest and fastest way to earn money online. If you're looking for a way to influence future products and services while getting paid at the same time, then InboxDollars is for you. Click the special link in the show notes of this episode today and get $5 just for signing up. Get this $5 signing bonus just for creating an account. That's InboxDollars. The link is in the show notes of today's episode. Get it, get your $5, and get started.
Prepare yourself. You're on the run with Remso W. Martinez.
All right, everyone. I've usually called myself the millennial Forrest Gump. I've seemed to have developed a rather peculiar life, as some would say. And I don't really look to get into strange situations. Strange situations just kind of appear around me, and I adapt to it. Anyone that's been listening to me, reading my stuff, and all, following all my misadventures knows that's the case. I don't ask for this; it just happens. I'm the millennial Forrest Gump, just running, and I happen to inspire a movement of crazy people who leave their lives and run with me. It's a pleasant cult. But, it is what it is. There's somebody I wanted to bring on today who has found himself really in a summer which he will probably not soon forget. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Gavin Wax. Gavin, it is a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us from Ground Zero. Is it still Ground Zero for the pandemic, or is it Ground Zero for the riots? Where the hell are you right now?
Well, thank you for having me, Remso. And yes, it's certainly still the epicenter of all that is horrible and miserable in this country, New York City. We are the center of the pandemic still, I believe, even though our numbers are trailing off. And we're certainly seeing the spike in crime and lawlessness and all the other social ills that have become the norm this summer and this year, in fact, that we all won't forget. And I can't run fast enough from it. I need to join your Forrest Gump march across the U.S. and just flee and run away. But unfortunately, you
will have to grow a beard down to your balls, but it takes time. It is like for me, I'm right outside of D.C. So, the only thing that really directly affected me in terms of like a lot of the other stuff going on was the pandemic. In Northern Virginia, we had the highest amount of cases in the Commonwealth, and being so close to DC and then Maryland, it was really kind of that. And then with the riots going on, we really didn't have a lot that happened in my side of Virginia. The town next to me, Manassas, had some just some vandalism and property damage. I'm not undermining it at all, but when you compare it to the videos and stuff of stores being just completely burned to the ground. I mean, I don't know what McDonald's did to the black community or what Wendy's did, but my God, I didn't think we'd live in America where we're burning down everyone's favorite fast food chains.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I love the McDouble as much as the next guy, and that's probably ended world hunger more than any other single human invention. So, burning down the providers of such nutritious delights is not going to solve any social ills in society. I can tell you that much.
Exactly. This is why I think that McDonald's should take over for UNICEF, but that's neither here nor there. I followed you on Twitter a lot during this whole thing, especially when the George Floyd riots started occurring. And I mean, the videos that you were uploading of what was going on, and I mean, the images you were able to find from other people that lived in your area, I began to realize that this was more about a cry for, quote unquote, systemic racism when people were throwing windows through a Rolex retailer and they were stealing all the watches. And I'm like, that probably has literally nothing to do with this, much like when they were burning down McDonald's. But really, what's it been like? Kind of take us from the start. Where were you in March, and what has life been really to this point? And so folks know we're doing this at the beginning of August. So I assume while stuff is still happening, it's pretty much quieted down because everyone realized that it's hard to social distance when you're destroying everything around you.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, with the Rolex stuff, they were obviously searching for bread, Remso. So I would hope you would be a little more sympathetic to their needs. They're bread hungry, and Rolex has helped deliver said bread. But as far as where I was in March, I was here in the city, and I was still working and going to the office. And all of a sudden, I was sort of on the train about the coronavirus early. I mean, I saw this thing coming out of China, this virus, and I was a little spooked compared to most conservatives. But I was never for these massive lockdowns and all these sorts of societal ending measures and diktats by the state. I did want to take it seriously. I had a mask, I remember, and I didn't know how bad it would be. We obviously now know that the virus is not as deadly as we thought, and it's pretty treatable, and there's a lot of therapeutics. So that obviously my view on that has changed, but I never would have thought in a million years we would have seen sort of the racial riots and civil unrest in 2020 on the heels of such a great economy. I mean, this is worse than stuff we possibly saw in the 1960s in the U.S. And New York obviously was hit very hard by that. This city was hit hard first with the closures from the virus, and now from the masses of protests and rioting and looting. It's completely disrupted civil society. The economy is completely screeched to a halt, and the few that are remaining here and trying to survive are doing so under extraordinary circumstances. I mean, I can only feel for business owners. I don't know how they maintain their stores. I don't know how they can keep their storefronts open, how they could pay their rent. How can anyone pay their rent? Unemployment rates soaring. I mean, the state is just making it impossible to do business. So we're in a really bad place as a country. Some places worse off than others. Certainly my state, New York, but I know California is up there as well as, the usual suspects. But this is going to have lasting impact on our society, and I don't think we fully have grasped that and fully see the full ramifications a few years down the line with all this trillions of dollars that are being injected artificially into the economy with no production behind it. I mean, this is just money being printed out of thin air. It's not tied to any real value. So we're setting ourselves up for some real nasty stuff down the line, much worse than what we're seeing now. And it's sad because things were moving in the right direction. I would have argued, back during the beginning of the year and towards the end of last year. And it's a shame that things have quickly descended in the wrong direction. But hopefully things can turn around going into November.
Yeah, and I mean, it really sucks that I have to say this, but I think a lot of issues that we've encountered in terms of, these societal problems, whether it be the riots, the statue attacks, the pandemic, and that time when we all thought that Joe Exotic should be released from prison. It's been really an emotional roller coaster. But I think the thing that sucks more about it is the fact that it has been an election year. I was watching Joe Rogan the other day, and he mentioned how he has a friend who I think he tested positive for coronavirus, and the doctor, before he went ahead and started providing him, the different options of what they could do, the guy asked him, so I don't know if this is going to bug you politically, but I think hydroxychloroquine is actually something that has a lot of rep to it, and I think it would help you. And the guy just looked at him. He's like, what do you mean my politics might be offended by it? And the doctor said, well, a lot of people who don't like Trump have not wanted to take it. So the guy looks back at the doctor and he's like, you mean they'd rather get sick or die or just feel terrible to stick it to Trump?
It's mass psychosis. We're dealing with one of the greatest episodes of mass psychosis. People have literally lost their minds, lost any sense of reality when it comes to Trump, when it comes to politics, when it comes to the world at large. And I think that's largely to blame on the mass media and a huge degree of brainwashing and propaganda and just utter nonsense being spread. And Trump was right when he came out and said that hydroxychloroquine was appeared to be a good medicine as a therapeutic for this disease, for this virus. And there were plenty of studies that showed that, and there was a massive effort by the media, by Big Pharma, to squash it. Because obviously it's a cheap generic drug that would make nobody money and would put this thing to rest much sooner. And obviously, it depends on how it's used and administered and at what point during, when you get the virus, it's administered. I mean, that's the same for all medicines, but that doesn't mean it has no use in fighting the virus. That just means you need to make sure it's used properly and obviously done under doctors' recommendations. No one's arguing against that. But the censorship we have seen against this drug by what they happened, the doctors in DC, that they censored the video, that they went out of their way banning anyone who dared share it. I mean, it just shows that there's a very concerted effort to hurt people, to hurt the country, to keep this going on for as long as possible, this social unrest, this pandemic, this economic downturn, because they think if we all suffer, it will lead Biden to victory. And I think that's such a sadistic way of viewing the world. It's really disgusting and shameful that people are subscribing to it, whether knowingly or unknowingly. But it's also pathetic for Biden that he had no chance otherwise, unless you basically had biblical plagues and all these horrible things happen in 1 year. I mean, this is certainly a year for the history books. He needed all these horrible things to align for even him to be considered competitive. So you could see how big of a landslide we were looking at back in January before this all happened.
Yeah, and I mean you're in a bit of a unique position because you stand as an individual at this intersection between media and politics with all the stuff you do, Gavin. You've got quite a big resume. I mean, I say that with all respect. But I mean, one thing that we've definitely seen is that because all of this is so politically motivated, what's funny is if I want to go ahead and find 10 liberals who are attacking Trump, I can just go anywhere online and do that. What I've always found is funny is that when you have these people who are Republicans who wanted to get far in the GOP monarchy or hierarchy, however you want to put it, it's their fast track to getting on MSNBC or going Twitter viral if they go ahead and start attacking Trump or attacking Dr. Bricks or any of these other people. And unlike a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to go ahead and speak out against my other Republicans, though if you're never Trump, you could speak out against literally every Republican. You actually push back against these people. You're quick to call someone a rhino, and you do it with actually, some reason behind it. What's that, kind of been like, having to have not only this cultural schism around you, but also this intra-party stuff, which is really just trying to tear apart at whatever sense of commonality a lot of people have?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think our greatest enemies are from within. And I think, the Republican Party, as flawed as it is, I agree with Tucker that it's one of the last institutions left that could combat the left if they would get their act together and understand what we're up against. But we have a lot of people who are not interested in ideas. They're not interested in bettering this nation or people's lives. They're only interested in their own self-aggrandizement and their own advancement and their little petty titles and within their little petty fiefdoms. In what you call the hierarchy of the party. And, these are people that, they're fine to go after Trump because he's an establishment buster. He's someone who goes against the trends, who goes against the orthodoxy. But they'll be the first to cry bloody murder if you dare criticize them on any of their policy positions or viewpoints or statements. It's total hypocrisy. But I'm of the belief that I don't put party over everything. I'm not an apparatchik for the party. I'm a conservative first and foremost. I'm someone who believes in actual principles and values, of which is a love of country, love of God, love of family, the rule of law. Limited government, et cetera, et cetera. Those values come first before, whatever letter comes after your name. And I think a lot of people seem to have forgotten that. I don't know why you would get involved in politics if you didn't care about anything. It's certainly not a career path that certainly pays dividends or is an easy one. I would only do this to advance an actual belief and believe in something. So there's a lot of these rhinos. There's a lot of these never Trumpers. They've ingratiated. They've always been there. They're the establishment of old. They've been on the back pedal ever since he won in 2016, but they're still out there. They're circling the wagon, hoping that he would lose in November, and they'll be able to reform the party back into their old Bushite neocon type of mentality, but we cannot let that happen. I mean, the party has drastically shifted. The Overton window has shifted, and we need to keep up with the times, and we need to understand that the soul of the nation is not this country club neoconservatism. It's working class populism and nationalism, which has, fusionism of other types of ideologies. I certainly come from a libertarian background like you do. That's where we first met. So I still hold many of those views, and I could be big tent to a certain degree, but I'm certainly not aligned with this sort of milquetoast establishment of old that's seeking to reassert itself on the political stage. That's why I recently had an article going against Larry Hogan in Maryland. I've been recently attacking a lot of the YRs, Young Republicans and others in Brooklyn who are completely, I would argue, I wouldn't even say that they're moderates. I would say they're complete left-wing lunatics. These are people that support open borders, nationalized health care, universal basic income. They're anti-police. I mean, these are basically complete leftists who are infiltrating the party. I believe, and I think there's cells like this across the country who are being funded and supported by the left-wing movements and nonprofits in order to weaken our institutions, in order to weaken our infrastructure, and to make us more impotent in the fight against the left. So I think we need to get real. We need to understand what we're up against and fight back in the strongest possible terms.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the ideas that you're trying to defend, I mean, a lot of people that might, be getting to know you for the first time here, they might think that you're talking about these large abstract things. But, as someone that has followed you and, kept up with you over the years, I mean, the stuff you're fighting over is really stuff that I consider just common sense shit. Support the family, support property rights. Law and order for a civil society. I never used to think that extremely basic things would be contentious, and I'm not winning any libertarian points. I mean, I've moved in a very non-political direction over the past years, but in the past couple of years, that ever since I left political consulting, but this whole year has really kind of made me reassess like what is important. And the thing is, if we don't have this strong base as a civil society, we can't talk about the more complicated issues. It's like a lot of libertarians are mad because I'm voting for Trump. And it's like, let's really look at this. You can talk about all your grand abstract ideas where you live in a void and everything is utopian. And listen, I'm not a big fan of police unions. I'm, I would consider myself very progressive when it comes to criminal justice and stuff like that. But at the same time, you're telling me that you're going to go ahead and defund the cops or completely abolish the police. Okay, what do? Because it's not like crime just goes away. And then what you have where you have these libertarians that are like, you're breaking the nap when you don't wear a mask or if you open your business, therefore it's good for the cops to come in. It's like, okay, so now you're for the cops. Yeah. It's at this point where it's like, we're not fighting over, reforming the tax code. We're not fighting. Well, I mean, in a way we are about public education. I like what Senator Rand Paul is doing, where he's like, let's just take money out of the Department of Education and write checks to bear instead of printing it. It's like, this is literally it. And here we are, we're going up against an old man who might have dementia, who's got to pick somebody. I mean, it's just so bad. It's like, I'm not saying this to be mean. I don't like Joe Biden, but I didn't really start thinking, man, is this guy like like, is he cognizant or not? And so all you have to do is just watch him on TV. It's ridiculous. So these things, we're at the point where it's like, I am, the left has just completely lost it. And by the left, I mean real ideologues. I know a lot of people in like, in Maryland, for example, which has traditionally been a blue state, went red for Larry Hogan. Now a lot of those people who have become more conservative now really don't like Hogan. But I mean, people tell me it's like, they were Democrat voters since they could vote. And they've looked around at what's happened and they're like, I can't vote for him. So all these people thinking that Trump is going to lose on a few of these particular situations, it's like, you got to understand there's enough people out there that have to work and pay the bills and feed their families. They don't want to deal with a lot of this petty bullshit. And I mean, last month, it's only been a month, really, if you think about it. It feels like a million years when Democrats were just going around the country and just completely destroying statues for the absolute hell of it. It was so funny because I'm sitting on my couch. I wake up late. I've got my coffee next to me. I turn on the Fox and I see you screaming in front of the Teddy Roosevelt statue. And I'm like, oh God, what's Gavin doing? So I turn on the volume, and I mean, it wasn't like a anti-Black Lives Matter rally. It wasn't really like an anti-Antifa rally. It was basically saying, listen, enough is enough of this shit. If we're going after Teddy Roosevelt, then this has gone way too freaking far.
Yeah, man. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that rally was a huge success. We got a lot of press from it. A lot of went viral. Many of the videos, the speeches, etc. And
actually, could you rewind a little bit? Can I tell us what happened? What led to that moment?
Yeah. So there was this movement that I saw by the board of the American Museum of Natural History to get rid of the Teddy Roosevelt statue in front of the museum, which is obviously there because without Teddy Roosevelt, that museum, that institution would not exist today. And they were trying to get rid of it because it depicted a black man and a Native American man standing tall and proud beside him on a horse. It's an equestrian statue. He's the focus of the statue, so he's on a horse, so he's obviously going to be elevated, and he's going to be the most prominent figure in this statue. But they're not depicted negatively. They're not depicted in a demeaning manner or subservient. They're standing tall and proud, and they're flanking him on either side. And
it's being alongside him. Right?
Yeah, they're alongside him, and they're representing, the continents that he visited and frequented, Africa and North America, because he was an outdoorsman, he was a naturalist, etc. And it represents his background. So there's nothing there about the statue. But this is what the left does. They take innocuous things that have historical meaning and historical relevance, and they seek to destroy it because this is about controlling the past in order to control the future. So they will always find anything and everything they can with a piece of art or whatever it is, and seek to destroy it. And they'll always move the goalposts, and they'll never concede. And they're not there to negotiate; they're there to destroy. And the mob basically got this museum to agree, and they were planning to remove it. And when we heard about it, they were planning to do it in the middle of the night and have no outside input, even though it is publicly owned statue on publicly owned ground. It should have been up to maybe a referenda at the very least, let the people decide. But they wanted to remove it on their own, and we made a big stink, and we got a ton of press, and I think it's kind of stalled them a bit. I don't know exactly where it is due to the lack of transparency, but it certainly stalled them through our protest. And we had over 200 people show up. It was one of the first in the country to really push back against this when they were going after the statues, when they were destroying the cities with the rioting, the looting. And it turned into a pro-police rally, but like you said, it wasn't necessarily anti-anything other than, anti-historical destruction and anti-lawlessness. We had people there from all backgrounds. We had some Democrats there because he was a pretty popular uniting figure. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of things that he supported.
He was pretty progressive, and I'm saying that in like the negative way.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was very progressive. I'm certainly not a fan of a lot of his policy proposals, but I liked his populist streak. I like that he was certainly an American patriot, a nationalist, and he was a sort of a folk icon in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's like what I'm trying to understand. Maybe it's because I'm older, but like, history is complicated. Life is complicated. I could hate like 90% of Teddy Roosevelt's, politics and still say that he was a great American.
Agreed. And that's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. And that nuance is dead. That historical analysis is dead. Everything has to be black and white now. And what's funny and ironic about it is that he was essentially the founder of the progressive movement, as you just mentioned. And that didn't save him. It didn't matter that he was ahead of his time in terms of race relations. It didn't matter that he was this stalwart for essentially a lot of left-wing ideologies. They're still coming after him. So if they could come after him, they could come after anyone. And it just shows how far things have moved from just the Confederate statues. They want a wholesale revision of American history, of world history. It's part of their cultural revolution. And we were happy to stand up, be the first to stand up and push back against it. But, what you were mentioning earlier was also interesting. I mean, don't get involved in politics if you think that this is all about utopianism and reaching an equilibrium in society. I mean, politics is about victories on the margin and small fights and small battles and small victories and pragmatism. And it moves society slowly in the right direction. I take the view that it should be all of the above, that politics should be part of moving us in the right direction, but also education, media, the culture, etc. And if you look at that holistically, politics is just one tool to move our country and move our society in the right direction, but it's not the end all be all. And you said it right. I mean, what's so crazy now about the political scene is that what we would have debated maybe just a few short years ago seems like really nothing compared to what we're debating today. I mean, today we're debating what used to be taken for granted as just consensus issues. I mean, everyone used to support law and order. Everyone used to support, or at least most people would support, respecting private property rights, not trying to erase history, not trying to just destroy the fabric of society, not just trying to destroy the nuclear family. I mean, these were things that for the most part, 90+% of people, besides a few fringe radicals, would essentially get on board with. But now that's become the new political dichotomy, and things have moved so far to the fringes that if we don't stand up, I mean, they are going to take control of the narrative. They are going to take control of the political levers in society, and they're going to push through this radical agenda, which is going to hurt us all. And I understand the libertarian views on some things, obviously having that background, but I don't see from a pragmatic standpoint how you can look at this election and think that Trump is not the best candidate for us on the whole. I mean, if you think Biden winning, which would imply the Senate goes with it, and a full Democrat control of our entire government would be good, I mean, you're out of your mind. I mean, they will set us back decades. They will push through the most regressive policy agenda you have ever seen, and they will come out. They are coming for blood. They will go after any and everyone. It doesn't matter what you call yourself, libertarian or otherwise, conservative or otherwise. Anyone who stands up against their dogma, their new religion, their wokeism, will be subject to severe repercussions professionally and even in terms of prosecution. We've seen, basically we're turning into a banana republic with some of these prosecutions. Now they're going after the NRA, what they did to Roger Stone, what they did to Flynn. I mean, that's going to happen en masse if we lose control of government. So like him or hate him, he is the last, obstacle against their Maoist Marxist takeover. And if you have any respect, and if you still do appreciate, the property rights that this country was founded on, and the freedoms this country was founded on, and your civil rights, and your right to be, your right to a free conscience and to your own opinions, and to speak your mind freely, then you should understand that as flawed as the Republican Party has been and how weak as they've been, they are our best shot, and anything else is just basically acquiescing to the left steamrolling over your rights.
Yeah, and I mean, it used to be, at least from my view, if you were not politically active at all, there at least used to be a barrier between a lot of the actions by the federal government, or a lot of the actions you see as technically being like national issues. A lot of the discussions we're having, there used to be a separation. As soon as you turned off the TV, you could go to the store, you can go talk to your neighbors, and it's this sense of, okay, well, yeah, obviously something important is happening, but at least it's not directly affecting my community. Now, because no one can really go to work, now because everyone has just been completely badgered by 24/7 media, it's almost like that sense of safety, that sense of calm, that sense of normalcy, that's what's been removed. And I mean, I'm seeing it in my area, and I live in a very well-to-do area of Northern Virginia. I can't imagine what it's been like for areas like New York, for example, where it's like all the national issues were essentially local issues, and now whatever sense of calm there was before this has just been completely obliterated.
Yeah, I mean the normalcy in our lives and what the world used to be like, 2019 and before is completely over. I think we've reached an inflection point in our society and our history that everything after the beginning of this virus essentially is just new territory, new ground, and a new era. And it's not a good era. It's not something that is a happy place. I think we're seeing really a complete revision of how society will operate and function. I think we're going to live in a less free society. I think we're going to, have a lot more divisions, a lot more animosity towards one another. I think there's going to be a lot of economic destitution. I think our rights are going to be trampled with all these different mandates to fight this China virus, which is really, nothing in my mind now after seeing the data come in is really not a cause to destroy our whole country over. But, people want to return to normal. And honestly, if there was a campaign that a politician ran on that said, we are going to open the economy, we are going to get back to normal, we are obviously going to take precautions on certain things, but we're not rewriting our entire society to fight a virus with a 99% survival rate, and we're no longer going to tolerate abuse of this onslaught of criminality in our society. If you ran on that platform, you would win hands down. I think the silent majority is still real. I think most people want that. They're just looking for leaders that have the backbone and the fortitude to say it. Trump has been. I wish he came out stronger for it in some regards. He has, I think, some bad advisors around him who have been misguiding him because a lot of these issues that have popped up in this year really play to his base, really play to his core policy platform that he's always stood for. So it should have been something that he could have seized the moment on. Instead, we've let the left take the narrative away. We've let fear-mongering rule the day. And as a consequence, we're in a really bad place as a country, something we haven't seen before. It really feels like a time on the precipice of a civil war or something worse. Just
Really? Okay, I agree with everything you say except that last part. We're dealing with a country that had a toilet paper freak out, and we weren't even running out of toilet paper. You think that we're going to start fighting each other?
I don't know. I think I saw those stories that said they were planning for a Trump win with possibly some states seceding. I mean, they were talking about, not conceding the election. I mean, I don't want this to happen. I would love this just to return to normal so I could go eat a burger inside a restaurant. But, the left, they seem like they will lose their everlasting minds if this guy wins again, and if it's winning by a decent margin that they can't dispute. So I think that they're going to do everything they can. I think they're going to manipulate polls. I think they're going to continue to push their narratives in the media, and they're going to wage total war. And if it backfires on them, then God help us all, because we saw what happened last time when they lost and they entered into this bout of psychosis that really began our discussion. I think it's only going to get worse. I mean, I don't know what they're capable of. And you look at some cities across this country, you look at Portland, you looked at, scenes in D.C. and Seattle, wherever. I mean, this doesn't look like the United States. This looks like some post-apocalyptic America with these roving gangs of Antifa setting up communes, taking over streets, beating up anyone who disagrees with them, and just and becoming a law unto themselves. I mean, this is not something I thought I would have seen in my lifetime. So we have become acclimated to these radical changes in our society that we would never have tolerated or even contemplated a few years ago. I mean, no one in the right mind would have thought that a major American city would have been had a huge part of its downtown been dominated by a domestic terror organization, and the local, state, and federal authorities were completely powerless to fight it off. I mean, so for me to say, what I said before, that we could be approaching some kind of, internal strife, I mean, it's possible it doesn't happen, but I think the way everything has been heading, if a few things go the wrong way, I mean, we could be looking at a really rough year. And I think it's only going to get worse till November. And I think win or lose, it's not going to be pretty after November.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a strange time to be alive, because I don't buy that this is the election to end all elections, only because they always say that. But this is really an election where it's like, if you want to go back to work, you know who you have to vote for. If you want to keep your police, good or bad, to at least understand that that's what you need for a civil society to function, then you know who to vote for. If you want to make sure that your neighbors aren't going to snitch on you for, being too close to another person, or whether or not your child violated a truancy law because they were 5 minutes late to a Skype classroom session, like, who to vote for. It's come to the point where just very, very basic things now have become such contentious things. And, I blame a lot of things, and everyone likes to blame the media and stuff like that. But I mean, the truth is we are ultimately responsible for the environment we've made. We've allowed ourselves to become this way. And that's the worst part about it. We all want to blame somebody else. We rarely want to actually take some blame for ourselves in this.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, and it is very strange times we're living in. It's a little surreal. I think, we talked about it earlier when you said, you can't believe it was just a month ago. I mean, time has literally slowed. Things feel like it just everything, the aura of just day-to-day life has changed. I mean, that probably has to do with, we're all working from home. We're all inside more often. We're when we're outside, it's all the social distancing. I mean, there's a lot of psychological components to this that I don't think are really being looked at fully. I think it's really changing how people look at the world, how they feel about each other, how they think about themselves, because, we're really in uncharted territory here in terms of all these drastic changes in such a short period of time. And I think, this is going to have repercussions down the line, not just economically, not just for the normal things that we can, quantify, but just, for just our society in general, and just how people, interact and how people act. And I think we already had the psychosis of the left before this lockdowns. I think it's only exacerbated that problem with a lot of these people now, not having jobs and being at home and getting paid to do nothing, because we have this big government nanny state essentially paying everyone just to stay home and indoors, rather than encourage them to go out and work or keep their businesses open. So we're basically fueling all these problems ourselves through these horrible policies. And if we would just return to normal, which would just take, a few tough decisions, like just biting the bullet, taking the bad medicine that's going to make you feel bad at first, but it's going to be good in the long term. If we would be willing to make those tough decisions as a country, we would be better off, maybe not in the short term, but certainly in the long term, for our posterity. And we need to look, beyond just election cycles. We need to look just beyond the next month or two of the news cycle, and say, listen, what we're doing right now, we're setting ourselves up for a real bad place. And these $1 trillion bailouts and all this other stuff is going to set us up for catastrophe.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that one. And, the one thing I kind of want to do, caveat this new show that I've been doing since, I think it's pre-plague. I don't know if we're going to call it, I'm going to call it BP, before the plague.
I like it. BP.
Yeah, BP.
Sponsored by BP.
It's really about understanding how we place ourselves in a situation where we're independent. And by independent, I don't mean fully being an autonomous person. It's hard to do that in this world, but being independent in the way that you can move when you need to move, that you have the resources and the money, so that way you're not affixed to a certain location. And then also being well within your own life, your finances, your health, so you have the ability to make those choices. So I am curious, during all of this, have you considered leaving New York?
I mean, it's come up more than I would have liked. I mean, had you asked me a few months ago, BP time, I would have said never. But really, the city's changed, and it's not the same place it was a few months ago. I mean, there are a few neighborhoods like mine in the Upper East that's doing relatively okay. I mean, there's a semblance of normalcy. There's stores open outdoors and things like that, and there's still a decent amount of foot traffic. But every other storefront is still closed. Even the places that are open, they're at minimal capacity, and they're definitely not going to make it through the winter. So we're kind of in this weird time right now where things are lingering. But if there is another lockdown, if there is a surge or whatever they're going to call it with the virus, whatever last vestiges of normalcy left in the city are going to be gone. And I don't think people realize that. In the city, yeah, I mean, a place like New York, you put up with it. You put up with a lot of the BS. You put up with these ridiculous, Democrat-run cities, because at the end of the day, they are cultural hubs. They are economic hubs. You have to be here to work. You have to be here to make good money. You have to be here to advance your career, and you get the perks of all the culture that comes with it: the restaurants, the theater, the music scene, whatever it is, the bars, the restaurants, etc. but when that's gone, then it's a horrible trade-off. Then you're basically just paying a lot of money for a little bit of square footage, and you don't have to work there. You could work literally anywhere now remotely, which I think is a good thing. I think basically what kept a lot of these cities alive, these Democrat-run cities alive, beyond just their name brand, like the name brand New York, what kept them alive is just the concentration of capital and the concentration of economic activity. But now that old 9 to 5, which I thought was just outdated anyway, but that 9 to 5 working from an office thing is starting to die out, and you could essentially do the same thing working remotely, working for shorter hours. The cities are going to lose their grip on that economic capital, and it's going to disperse across the entire country. You're going to see a resurgence in the suburbs. You're going to see a resurgence in rural areas because people now could be more flexible with where they live, and many of them probably would not have chose to live in the city, but it may have been the only place that they could work. So that's going to have huge ramifications for these Democrat-run cities, and they're going to have to really reform, change their tune, change their policies if they're going to want to attract people, attract human capital, attract businesses. Otherwise, they don't have a leg up anymore, and they're going to go the way of a lot of the former industrial cities went in the Midwest. They're going to really just kind of cripple and die, and I think we're going to see a massive change demographically from the cities into these periphery areas where people can get lower cost housing and they can still get all the amenities that were available to them in the cities, but now they could work from wherever. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that may be a good thing. I mean, I think that'll break the stranglehold. I would just hope that the people fleeing the cities don't vote for the same policies that destroyed the cities. And I would hope that people who remain in the cities would be wise enough to vote for new government and new policies to keep them competitive. For a place like New York, though, back to your original question, to be specific, I think New York is a unique case just due to its size and its stature and its significance. So I think it'll still retain a core of business and culture, but it's never going to be the same. It's a shadow of its former self, and it's going to go through a slump, and it's a very cyclical city in general. It's a cyclical place that, they go through these ups and downs where it has to get really, really bad before it gets better again, like we saw with Giuliani, et cetera. And it's a shame it has to be like that, but that's kind of because of the transient mindset of the city where people come here from wherever and they leave after a few years, and they're not building roots, they're not building communities, they're not building families. And that's what you could basically say about a lot of, I'm drifting off here, but you could say that about, mass migration in general. When you have this mass migration, it's like, a lot of transients who have no roots, who have no connection to these different communities, to these nations. You get that sort of cyclical nature because if you don't have the institutional knowledge of what destroyed these places or what made those places great, you're not going to be able to vote properly, and you're not going to have government that reflects people that have that institutional knowledge. I'm getting really theoretical here, but
yeah, no, I mean, I totally see where you're going with it. I mean, you were talking of things in like a large scale. I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned through this whole situation is really think locally. And I mean, I'm not a native Virginian, but I've been living in Virginia since 2007, 2008. So this is really the only stable place I knew because I was an Army brat. It's just part of the life. And it is really funny because when I moved here to Fairfax County, it was really a very deep red place, very moderate Republican, but deep red compared to, a lot of our neighbors. And then over time, you had a lot of people coming down from up north. And you had a lot of people from California coming. You had a lot of people from the major cities coming. So Northern Virginia has really become this transitory place. And then, of course, we have a lot of people coming from overseas. So, of course, I mean, Virginia went from being a reliably red state to a blue state, despite the fact that almost most of the Commonwealth, when you look at a map, is conservative. And, this is my adopted home. So I understand it a bit more. And I've always lived in the South primarily. So it always bothered me when it's like you've got people who don't live here. You have people that have nothing to do with people who actually live and work and die in Virginia, telling Virginia how to go ahead and go about our days. And I mean, the best thing I did was in the middle of the pandemic, I went on a road trip. I did a full podcast about it. I did a whole road trip around Virginia, checking out all the cities I've never been to. And I mean, in the midst of all this, of course, what am I going to run into? I'm going to run into Confederate monuments. And I'm not stupid. I know that there are lost cause monuments that were put up to go ahead and basically continue to spread this idea of white supremacy in the South. There's a difference between those monuments, which you could usually tell if you did a little bit of homework, and monuments like a majority of the ones I saw in the South of the Commonwealth, where you just see hundreds and hundreds of names. And you see these names and you read the plaques, and what are they? They're hundreds of names of a full generation, or in some cases, in one of the towns I went to, 2 generations of men, fathers and sons, cousins and uncles, who went to go fight in a war and they never came back. And, with the current narrative we're seeing right now with the African American community, I agree with them. We're not that far removed from Jim Crow. We're not that far removed from slavery when you really look at things flat. But at the same time, the same could be said for a lot of these communities, where what happens when you take all the men out and they all die in war, and then the communities are burnt down because of Sherman's march to the sea. You're going to have the situation where, it's going to take a while for these people to recover. So think about it from their point of view. They're poor. Their parents were poor. Their great grandparents were poor. They never left. They stayed at home. The jobs went away. The drug use went up. And now what you're trying to do is pick apart part of their communal identity that they have left. And then people get mad when they say, "Stop, leave us alone." It's completely like this backhanded elitist mindset that we're seeing from people who otherwise should just leave others alone.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff there, what you just said. I'll start with, how you have states like Virginia and actually like New York that are large swaths of it are actually Republican, and they're skewed, I think, in the case of Virginia with Nova, with Northern Virginia, and in the case of New York, the 5 boroughs. And what you used to have before some Supreme Court rulings is that a lot of states had their own internal electoral college, that they had a sort of a quasi-federal system at the state level where you had the counties have equal representation in, say, their upper house and the Senate. And those kind of mechanisms, which were drawn from the Constitution, allowed sort of this geographic disbursement of political power, so it wouldn't be concentrated in just the cities. And the Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional with their one man, one court ruling, all that nonsense. In a lot of states that previously had that sort of system, had to replace them, and that actually helped the Democrats, obviously, because they have their concentration of power in the major urban areas, in the major population areas, and then they could outvote the huge swaths of the rest of the state, which, if you look at a map by county, which you could do for a place like Virginia and New York, you'll see sea of red, and then you'll see just pockets of blue, and those pockets are what outvote the rest. So a simple change like that could really help a lot of these cities, even states, but also cities. Funny enough, New York City used to have that. They used to have a bicameral city council with a board of aldermen and a I believe it was called I forgot the name of it, there was the Board of Revision, and it basically said that each borough had an equal representation. So a very Republican borough like Staten Island had an equal representation with the other 4 boroughs, and that actually helped balance power and helped make sure that interests of one borough wasn't overwhelmed by the interests of the larger boroughs. So simple things like that have been, trampled on. But to get to your broader point about, the Confederacy, the Civil War, the South, I mean, nuance is dead. I mean, the left has killed nuance. They've killed, as we mentioned earlier, any sort of like real historical analysis. And look, obviously at the time, slavery was reprehensible. I'm glad the Union won. I'm glad slavery was put to a bloody end. But you have to also remember that there was nuances to this. Some nuances that people don't like to talk about, how slavery was legal in the North throughout the entire duration of the war. West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky, all Union states, including also the capital of the country, Washington, D.C., all had slavery. And then even when the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, it wasn't even universal. It was only for a select few states. So you have to remember that looking back on it in such black and white terms is kind of not accurate. It's not what you should be doing. You should be looking at it with a bit of nuance. You should also recognize that most of the people that fought for the South were basically poor back farm country, bumpkins who didn't own slaves, who didn't own plantations. And those are the people you're talking about, the generations of people that died in a very bloody conflict. And, they were fighting more for what they felt was their states' rights and what they felt was for their own, pride in their Southern heritage, et cetera, because many of them had no economic interest. If anything.
Oh, well, I mean, what's really funny now is like with the roaming bands of federal agents who are just like grabbing people in black bags and driving off of them. I'm not laughing because I think it's okay. I'm laughing because I think it's kind of funny. I have my own objections to it, but it is kind of funny where you have these liberal cities saying, oh, we don't want federal agents or federal, anyone from the federal government here. It's like, well, that's really funny how you have these cities and these states that are trying to repel what they consider federal intrusion. I mean, it's really funny. I think that's the beautiful thing about America that we ignore. Now, myself, my family, I come from a very multiracial, multi-ethnic family. And when you look at my mother's side, who has been in the United States on her father's side, going back to the 1600s, they were French Huguenots. We have someone who was actually from New York. It was a Brownell, we think. That was my mom's side of the family. He was one of the first officers to lead the first racially integrated unit in the Union.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So, here we have this part of my family, which is part of really the tapestry of America. Yet at the same time, here we are generations later. And I come from the sentimentality of, someone who's lived and grown up in Southern culture. And I'm able to look at the Civil War from both ways and understand that, the thing that was really lost was a shared sense of common humanity.
And that's what a lot of people are missing. I mean, at the end of the Civil War, there was, they tried to come together. Some of those statues were built. They were built for a purpose. They were built to sort of unite the country and to bring everyone back under the fold. I mean, you could argue about it, obviously, in the past, looking back, but this was a part of our history. We should learn from our history. And if you start to judge these pre-modern people by postmodern standards of morality, you have to erase all of history because, okay, yes, the Confederates, okay, but where do you end it? I mean, because the founders also had slaves and, all the great Greek and Roman thinkers that we base much of Western civilization on owned slaves. There were slaves in biblical times, with the kingdoms of Israel going all the way up to the time of Jesus. I mean, so, humanity is about progression and it's about, the redefining of moralities to, meet with the times. I don't think it's been static. I mean, I argue it's objective, sure. But, I'm not going to look at pre-modern people and hold them to standards of postmodern individuals. I mean, the world's a cruel place. I think people have adapted and have bettered themselves as a society. We've had enlightenments. We've had dark ages. There's been ups and downs. But, with the statue stuff, it really, if you take it to its logical conclusion, we have to erase all of history. And I don't necessarily think every statue is commemorating someone. It could be viewed in different ways. It could be viewed as simply just remembering the past and remembering what these people did, good and bad. And that's the thing we have to remember. It's not this black and white. It's not so cut and dry. There were people that fought for the Confederacy that were good guys. There were people that fought for the Union that were bad guys. There were people that, were good and bad. And, they used to teach history like that. Now it's all like something out of a Hollywood movie. It's so childish and immature. And you obviously have that perspective. I think there are other people who could have a similar perspective, maybe coming from a mid-Atlantic state where they could see the South and the North. But, unfortunately, that these discussions can't be had. And if I said even, a 10% of what I said today anywhere else, they would just immediately be like, oh, he's a racist, whatever. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm just here to talk about, history in a sane, rational way. And they all want to just, paint it as cut and dry to push their own political narrative, which, as you pointed out, is ironic because a lot of the narratives they're pushing in the modern day would have been applicable to what the Confederates wanted. Now they're all of a sudden, they're pushing back against federal enforcement of laws. They're pushing for secession. They're pushing for, nullification of immigration laws, nullification of a lot of different federal legislation or federal decrees from the Trump administration. All those things are things that the Democrats and the in the South during the Confederacy would have supported. So it's just ironic that they're the first. They don't even see that hypocrisy in their current political aspirations.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't believe that history repeats itself, but it sure as hell rhymes.
I think it definitely does. I mean, I am of the full belief that we have a short history. So we have a short memory as humans. We tend to forget our past, and that's why we're doomed to repeat it because we don't learn from our past. That's why history is so important. I mean, there's always like the little anecdotes, like don't invade Russia in the wintertime. There's also just more macro level stuff. Like there's definitely more macro level stuff. I mean, people have always made analogies to ancient Rome. People have made analogies now to the French Revolution, etc. Obviously, it's never going to be an exact correlation and just a perfect match. But, if you look at these historical periods of time, let's just take, for example, the French Revolution, and you had what started out as legitimate grievances, and then it was taken over by a very radical left-wing faction, and they ended up being far worse oppressors than the kings that they replaced. And you see the same thing in, say, a place like Cuba, where, the original revolution against Batista was a corrupt kind of mafia-run dictatorship, okay, but what replaced it ended up being much worse. And, you could see these sort of patterns throughout history. Again, they're not exactly perfect, but if you learn from them, you could make better decisions in the future. And I think conservatives in general and people on the right and even libertarians tend to have a better sense of that than the left, who seem to have a very short memory, and it's very utopian, and it's very not based on reality. It's not based on the human condition. It's not based on how people actually operate in society. It's based off of failed economic treaties and just really trying to change the world to fit an image that's just not natural and just not organic. And that's why their types of rule and their types of government always end up being the most cruel and tyrannical, because they're forcing something that just wouldn't come about naturally, that wouldn't come about organically, that's just not really widely supported, because they want to just completely, utterly change society. And that's what we're seeing now. They want to do that, and it's becoming they're becoming a louder and louder minority. They're growing in numbers, but you see how they could just completely destabilize and debilitate the entire nation by just having a few small cells of very radical fanatics in the major media markets, in the major cities. We saw with James O'Keefe's Project Veritas, they pointed this out. It's like, you don't need a really big groundswell of support. You just need a few thousand crazy bastards in these major cities for people to be like, holy crap, they're everywhere. Holy crap, they must be really popular. And it's like, no, that's just like a marketing gimmick. They're trying to give you the illusion that these radical left-wing views have the popular support that they really don't. I'm rambling, but yes, that was.
Oh no, I mean, you just reminded me. Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, you just remind me of the story. When I was working at Freedom Works, one thing I like to do during my lunch break is I would walk over to Capitol Hill. There was always a rally or something going on. I didn't really care what the rally was about most of the time. I just want to go actually just see what was going on. It's part of the joy of being in D.C. You get to see people do that stuff. And I'll never forget, there was this pro-life rally. Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, Rand Paul were there. Matt Walsh was there. And across the street, you had people from Emily's List and Planned Parenthood show up for a, quote, counter rally. But what ended up happening was they showed up in a bus. Everyone got out. A couple people with cameras stood in front of them. They all crowded together very tightly. Then they did a chant and they waved their signs. And as soon as the guy with the camera put his camera down, they just went over to the bus. And I thought, well, that's really weird. That's kind of a pathetic rally. But I end up watching our local Fox affiliate when I get home, and you would have thought that like thousands of people showed up, and it was for hours long, and that the whole narrative wasn't painted by the actual truth behind the context of the event, but it was all from the people who were spoken with, and it was everyone who showed up on behalf of Emily's List and Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, and I mean, I know they've done that. They'll downplay the pro-life rallies and marches, and then they'll basically get a certain frame and a certain camera angle to make it seem like the counter pro-choice marches are equal in size, when that's just never the case. And sure, there are definitely been mass left-wing gatherings as well. I mean, I think those crowd-sized things are usually kind of irrelevant. I think there's a lot of people that could feel very strongly and just never show up in general. I don't think it necessarily reflects on a movement's popularity, and that goes for both left-wing and right-wing movements. But it's for sure. I mean, there's massive media manipulation, and it's all very subtle, and it's done to make people. I mean, people generally want to conform, and I feel like a lot of people tend not to want to go against the grain. Like I'm talking about, the average Joe and Jane. I think, so if you give the impression that a certain viewpoint, a certain ideology, a certain set of beliefs has a lot more support than it really does, you're going to gain a lot of supporters. And I think that's what happened with BLM. I mean, they obviously conflate. They're very good with semantics. I mean, just like the word liberal in and of itself used to basically mean libertarian or classical liberal. Now it means something completely different. They do these semantic games with things like progressive. Obviously we all want to progress. We all want to move forward in a good trajectory. So they like to market their things like Black Lives Matter. I mean, so you can't argue against that because, of course, you believe Black Lives Matter. Who would deny that? But they obviously capitalize them. They make it a movement now, and they put a certain creed. They attach a creed to it. And now if you argue against that really regressive and Marxist creed, you apparently don't think Black Lives Matter, because they were very smart and coy to make the name of their movement the same as their slogan or the phrase that came about organically. And that's what they do. And it's all these little games, it's all these things, and that's how they're able to manipulate public opinion and public opinion polls. And that's why you saw a surge for the BLM movement originally, and then the polls started to decline over time as a lot of this stuff became more common knowledge. And thank God for the internet. Thank God for alternative sources of media and information, things like this podcast, where people can get information from a whole variety of different sources. And that marketplace of ideas, that free form of exchange, can break down their narratives, can break down these subversions that they're creating to manipulate people's feelings about certain things. And that's why we see a big push by the left, by the big tech monopolies, and I'm sure we may disagree on this, but there's a real big push from them to censor certain viewpoints, to come down hard on certain viewpoints, and they'll have they'll have defenders who claim property rights protections, even though they are the beneficiaries of many government privileges, and they're doing it under the auspices of those privileges to suppress certain voices, to suppress certain viewpoints, and that's doing a big disservice to the country in general, because if you can't get these opposing views out, you're really setting yourself up for one-party rule, a one-party state, and that's the path really towards tyranny, the road to serfdom, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, since you bring it up, my biggest thing has always been, I don't care what you believe or what you do, as long as we're all equal under the law. And It's like, if I go and I run someone over with my car and it's on camera and I say, well, I don't recognize the person as being a person, or any other type of bullshit like that, like, I still go to jail. When it comes to these, when it comes to like Facebook and Twitter, if they want to be a publisher, I mean, if they want to go ahead and censor people and go ahead and do all that stuff, my thing is, let them do it. But they can't have the same protections like an actual social media platform should be. If they want to be a publisher, if they want to actually start interjecting more of their ideology and their actions into the space they've created, then that's the bed they've made. They have to sleep in it, and they should be able. I mean, it's like when I explain it to people, it's like if somebody tweets out, Trump is an alien and he eats children and stuff, he could technically sue the person who's saying that. But now if Facebook is going to go ahead and say what is right and what is wrong, and they allow certain things like that to stay up, then not only does Trump have the right to sue the person that said that, he also has the right to sue Facebook and Twitter. Why? Because that's the environment they've made.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you. Equality under the law, and it's kind of ridiculous that a lot of people who claim to be pro-market and free market are doing these mental gymnastics and pushing out these legalistic arguments to defend the current Section 230 provisions, which have set up completely unequal protections. They basically are given protections against any sort of liability that a traditional non-internet, non-digital company would not have, just because they happen to be online. But it's ridiculous. If I had a newspaper and I published certain things, I could be held liable for what I published, what I editorialized. But you have these online companies who are digital and they don't print them, and they're not traditional media. And for that simple reason that they could publish things, they could editorialize, they could manipulate and engage in things that would be akin to a publisher, and they don't have the same liabilities. And it's just simply not an equal playing field. And they want to be able, and the whole law is written in a way that is, one, it's antiquated, and two, it just doesn't understand the realities. If you want to be a platform, fine. To be a platform and to not be held liable for whatever's published on your platform, you cannot editorialize that content, you cannot manipulate that content, you cannot censor that content within a certain framework. Obviously, if someone's calling for death threats or something like that, you can make provisions.
Oh yeah, once you break the law, you're not just obligated to do it, you legally have to do that.
Have to do it, yeah, and then fraud, etc. I mean, there's already existing statute and law that would cover a lot of this. I mean, it could be reiterated, sure, but basically, if you want to be a platform, you don't want to be held liable for the views of your users on said platform, you cannot engage in this mass type of politicized editorialization and censorship, etc. And if you can't do that, that's fine. You could still operate as you want. You're just going to be a publisher, and you're probably going to have to pay more in legal fees, and it's going to come at a cost. And that's what it should be. I mean, that is about as free market as it gets. We have courts of law. We have we have laws on the books, and we have litigation for a reason. And you're not going to get government protections and government privileges to shield you from said liability and litigation unless you're adhering to the letter of the law, and they're not adhering to the letter of the law. They're clearly abusing it, and it's a badly written law. It should be revised, and Twitter could do whatever they want to do, and if they want to continue to operate as they're operating, that's fine. No one's saying they can't, but they should be liable to actions. If you want to delete someone's account that they may have put a ton of money into, that they may have built up over years, and that they may have published certain views on, then you should be liable. And at the same time, if someone publishes something else on your platform that calls for the destruction of a country or is calling against to kill people, then you should, or spreading defamation and slander, whatever, that you may be held liable because you're giving them a platform. So it's either you allow free speech or you don't. It's one or the other. I think it's a pretty simple standard. I think it meets the premise that you argued for, equality under the law. So there's no reason that people should be arguing against this. It's pretty straightforward to me. The only reason they're doing it is because I think there's a lot of nonprofits and a lot of these supposedly free market think tanks that are technically on the dole of big tech, and they're coming up with means to argue essentially for government privileges under the auspices of private property rights, when it's not that. This is not about private property. Twitter could do whatever the hell they want to do. Facebook could do whatever the hell they want to do. But in doing so, they should be liable for their actions. It's simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I have nothing to do with the student organization, which I once loved and still have a soft spot for, Students for Liberty. I was a campus coordinator. I did all this stuff. I have very fond memories. I'm glad I did it, but I don't really support them anymore, or really have anything to do with them, because when you look at who supports like LibertyCon, for example, who are two of the biggest donors, Google and Facebook, and you're telling me that doesn't have a sway? Of course it has a sway, because you don't want to have to piss off the people that are giving you money.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's true. And then that we saw, I mean, a lot of these even conservative think tanks like Heritage, they were on Google's dole. And they were obviously going to, carry water for them. And it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, a lot of these companies, they benefit from government protections, government subsidies. They operate as a monopoly. It's not an equal playing field at all. I mean, if people want to argue that a lot of these industries are in a free market, they're not. They're hardly at equilibrium. And they're hardly operating under, ideal conditions of a free market. So if you understand economic theory, when you start to get the government involved, you're bound to create monopolies. I still hold that view, from my days as a libertarian. But they're gonna pretend that's not the case, and they're gonna pretend that these companies haven't amassed so much power and haven't taken advantage of certain legal provisions and certain government privileges, which is just a complete joke. It's ridiculous to assume that. I just wish that they were as there's so many other industries that are completely overregulated. I mean, I know someone brought up something about the auto industry. Like if I wanted to go start building cars out of my garage and selling them, I couldn't do that. So where's the libertarian or free market think tank defending, independent automakers? They're hardly there because there's no giant donor pool for it, but they'll gladly go to bat for big tech under the auspices of, we're this righteous free market organization. But it's like, you hardly apply those principles broadly and equally to all these different industries. You hardly talk about other industries that have a whole slew of things preventing real free market and real, small businesses from rising and allowing competition within these industries. But you'll gladly go to bat for very clearly corporatist monopolies that benefit from government privileges because of your warped view of property rights and giving them their own freedoms, when it's clearly they're abusing all of that.
Yeah. Strange times, man. Strange times. This is going to be such a great movie when somebody actually does get a 2020 movie, right? But hey, I appreciate your time. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I hope people definitely learned. You're a man in motion, and I love being able to sit back and be along for the ride and see you go into action, Gavin. I really do. If people want to go ahead and keep up with you and everything else that you're doing, how could they do so?
Absolutely. You can follow me on all my social media platforms at Gavin Wax, GavinWax. That's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and of course the great Parler, which I have recently joined. And you can check me out there. My website at gavinwax.com. You can check out my club, the New York Young Republican Club, www.nyyrc.com. I have columns in Town Hall, Newsmax, and a few other sites. You can check them out there. And thanks again for having me on, Remso. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Folks, you heard the man. Everything will go ahead and be in the show notes today. Listen, whether you like me or hate me, whether you agree with everything my guests say or not, what's better is that we're having these conversations and they're more than the sound bites. And at least for a little bit, at least for a small chunk of your day, we can pretend that things are at least slightly more comedic, slightly more normal than they really are. As always, I'm Remso W. Martinez. You're listening to On the Run. Have a great night, America. Good night.
Check out our other shows and more from the We Are Libertarians network at wearelibertarians.com.